Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Mr. Hilton, President and CEO of the Hilton Foundation, Ms. Melching, Founder and Executive Director of Tostan, Excellencies, and distinguished gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to join you this evening. I'm honored to address this important gathering of philanthropists, humanitarians, and friends. Standing here and having listened and seen what Ms. Melching has been introducing her extraordinary experience and contributions, I feel very much humbled. I think what Ms. Judy Miller has introduced about my all previous titles, that is not important, I think. What is important is how much you can contribute to well-being and benefit and development and changing the world. How much you have done in such extremely difficult circumstances. I have been in this job during the last almost 9 months, and having seen what she has been doing, and so many of you have been doing around the world, I feel very humbled, and I feel how limited my job, what I have been doing is. And I think that really made my resolve much firmer to do much more for the world peace and security and prosperity, and helping those people from abject poverty and disease and distorted social traditions. On the very distorted so-called social tradition, so many people, as she has been explaining, have been suffered too long, too much. This is what United Nations has been doing, but United Nations has very much a limit in terms of resources, in terms of reach. We cannot reach all around the world. Only with the help of people like you and people like all of you, United Nations can make contribution. United Nations can make a difference in making change these social systems, in making help people overcome this abject poverty and diseases. I'm very much grateful, first of all, to have known what you have been doing. First, let me join others in congratulating you sincerely. Ms. Molly Melching and Tostan, as the recipient of this year's Conrad Hilton Humanitarian Prize. Ms. Melching, in celebrating your achievement and those of the thousands of people who work with Tostan, we are celebrating the best of humanity. You have empowered people by sharing with them vital knowledge, focusing on the priorities of daily life, from health to math, and from literacy to management skills. You have helped improve the lives of millions of individuals in hundreds of African communities. And your grassroots approach has fostered a true understanding and respect for human rights and democracy. You have also recognized that for sustainable development to truly flourish, the active participation of women is critical. Women are the world's transmitters of knowledge. They are the backbone of their communities, entrusted with their families' health and welfare. When vested with the right tools and granted access to vital services, they bring positive change by challenging the inequities they witness. By recognizing this, you are empowering women to advance their vital contribution towards Millennium Development Goals, agreed by all the world's governments as a blueprint for building a better world in the 21st century. and you are honoring the humanitarian principles pioneered by Conrad Hilton and his foundation over 6 decades ago. Mr. Hilton, today, you and your colleagues at the foundation continue to advance the values and principles of your founder. Conrad Hilton was a true ally of the United Nations, a man who embodied the spirit of the United Nations Charter. When Conrad Hilton created the foundation, the world did not yet possess the technology to channel every major emergency occurring around the world into our homes. And yet, he had the foresight and conscience to place himself front and center in the movement to combat national and global problems, challenges. He felt equally strongly about causes at home and abroad. When he spoke of the natural law that obliges you and me to relieve the suffering, the distressed, and the destitute, he made no distinction according to geographical boundaries. His compassion was as global as his business sense. Today, we live in a world where boundaries count for less and less. An emergency unfolding one side of the world is watched live in living rooms on the opposite side through all communication facilities. If Conrad Hilton could honor the natural law of obligation without that instant knowledge of crisis in his time, we surely have no excuse not to honor it in ours. One of the crises that have been dominating our television screens for the past 4 years is taking place in Sudan, Darfur in Sudan. I was recently there. I witnessed firsthand the life-shattering effects of injustice and inequality. I saw the devastating impact of man's inhumanity to man. In Darfur, more than 4 million people have been displaced as a result of the conflict between the government and militia groups. More than 12,000 humanitarian workers, most of the Sudanese, are struggling to provide assistance to the affected populations. Half of these affected have fled their homes and land to escape violence. Men, women, and children are struggling against all odds to live their lives with dignity. This tragic cycle of violence has been allowed to continue for far too long. I'm encouraged that the government of Sudan has accepted a joint operation, a peacekeeping operation, bringing together forces from the African Union and the United Nations. Once this hybrid operation is deployed, this challenging operation will be an unprecedented effort. At the same time, we must also look to resolve the causes of the conflict. A new and conclusive round of negotiation is due to begin next month in Libya. This must be supplemented by a serious development effort in the region, including ensuring access to water resources and other natural resources. The challenges we face in Darfur are not unique, are not only one. In many crisis areas, in Somalia, Sri Lanka, and DRC, civilians continue to bear the intolerable brunt of conflicts not of their own making. Credible and lasting political solutions to these and other conflicts are essential to allow people to return to their homes and resume their lives in safety and security. But while we seek those solutions, our immediate humanitarian work to provide day-to-day assistance must continue. It can never wait for the next round of the talks to begin or the next peace treaty to be signed. It must be swift, proactive, and effective. In that regard, your contribution, humanitarian workers and all philanthropists, voluntary workers, are crucially essential to the work of the United Nations activities. Thank you very much. We have in this room, we have many of colleagues who are working with me in the United Nations. Executive Director of UNICEF, Under-Secretary General for OCHA, and many other colleagues who have been tirelessly working and traveling around the world. I'm one of them, I claim to be, but my role is very much limited. Unlike you may always hear Secretary General of the United Nations may seem very high, very noble positions, but I always feel very humble when I realize that how much limited resources, how much limited capacity I have. These limited capacity and resources can be complemented and only by your contribution and your own efforts all around the world. That is why we are doing all we can to improve the way the UN responds to emergencies. We recently initiated a major reform process to ensure that for each and every emergency, we are able to meet the needs of its victims in health, in protection, in water and sanitation services, and in other essential areas. We must reduce the gaps in our response in places like Darfur, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Sri Lanka, and elsewhere. There are so many places. We must bring more accountability, more order, and more predictability to the process. And we must forge strong partnership with the national organizations on the ground and other humanitarian communities. In the past, whenever an emergency occurred, the humanitarian community would scramble to find the resources to respond. These often came too little, too late. That is why last year, the United Nations launched the Central Emergency Response Fund, known as the CERF, C-E-R-F. This allows donors to pre-position funding so that aid workers can jumpstart humanitarian operations and rapidly deliver relief to victims during the first phase of an emergency. That is when most lives are at stake. The CERF also provides assistance to underfunded, forgotten emergencies, most of which never make it to our television screens. Since its inception, the CERF has contributed to saving the lives and livelihood of millions of people. The UN will organize a fundraiser in December to replenish the fund. I urge you to consider supporting these important funding mechanisms. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, now let me briefly say about global warming. Global warming makes it even more urgent to plan for disaster mitigation, and it makes the challenge even greater. The report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change concludes that the hundreds of millions of people face increased risks from climate-related hazards linked to global warming. More floods, more droughts, more intensive storms, heat waves, and rising sea levels are all predicted. And with this, significant population migration and displacement will result. Only last month, hundreds of millions of people were affected by unusually widespread flooding in parts of Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas. This is a wake-up call that more must be done now to mitigate the impact of disasters. Some estimates suggest that $1 invested today in risk reduction can save between $7 and $10 in relief and recovery costs tomorrow. Risk reduction prevents death and makes good economic sense. I urge you to encourage governments to make it a priority. In less than 2 weeks, on September 24th, I'm convening a high-level meeting on climate change to discuss our global strategy. Many of you are already working on this vital issue in your institutions, your communities, and your private lives. We all must work together across sectors, professions, and governments in a strategic partnership to address this complex, pressing issue. Here too, we can learn from the excellent example set by Tostan, the organization we honor today. In the countries where it works, Tostan incorporates activities to help sustain the environment, for example, through the innovative use of fuel-efficient wood-burning stoves to combat deforestation. Dear friends, in the 60 years since the founding of the Conrad and Hilton Foundation, just 1 year before the founding of the United Nations, you are 1 year older than United Nations. The world has in many ways evolved faster than we could have imagined. Today, just as our interconnectedness means that our challenges are global, so too should we strive to ensure that our successes are global. And there can be no greater aim than achieving true and lasting development for all. As we redouble our efforts to reach the Millennium Development Goals by 2015, let us take inspiration from Tostan's remarkable accomplishments in strengthening the capacities of communities and individuals, particularly of women. And let us recall that all of us, from the United Nations to the private sector, and from the local to the global, share the responsibility of fulfilling our objectives. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.